have a friend from my political days. He's, I'll call him a healthy cynic. That'll be the charitable way to put his basic approach to the world. I always say he's kind of glass half empty. I'm pretty sure you spit in it, so it's that different level of cynicism, I say glass half full, glass half empty, but there's always that other group that's really, really suspicious, and he's in that group. So sometimes when I talk to him, he'll say, hey, what'd you preach on last weekend? Love? Yep, almost always. And he's half joking, half not, right? But because he's cynical. I get it. But there's a story told about the evangelist John that when he had his community, they would get together to celebrate the Mass. And how amazing would it be that your homilist at Mass was someone that knew Jesus? What better message would you get than from someone who actually spent time with him? And the story goes that John, in this particular liturgy, they finish their reading, and he stands up, and they're all settling in for a good long message, and he just says, love one another. And he sits down, and the whole community, oh, wow, so powerful. Just one sentence, great. Oh, nice job, John. Okay, here, think about that. And the next week, he does it again. Just stands up and says, love one another, and sits down. They're like, oh, okay, really driving the point home. Gotcha, great. But then he does it week 3 and week 4 and 5 and 6, and months go by. And finally, he does this at Mass, love one another, sits down, and someone says, John, you knew him. You knew Jesus. Isn't there anything else you can tell us that would help us on our faith journey? And he said, well, I don't see any point in talking about anything else, he said, until you start doing this one. Love one another. And when we're honest with ourselves, it's difficult. Ron Rolheiser made this point that, what's the Stevie Nicks song? I love to quote unorthodox prophets, so we'll quote the prophet Stevie Nicks when she sang in Gold Dust Woman, shatter your illusions of love. And really that song's kind of getting at this point. We can talk about love in one sense, all the goodness, and there are people that are gracious and kind in receiving of that love and give it back to us. But there's a whole other side of love, which is people who don't. People that we avoid and people who avoid us. People we don't talk to, people we don't want to. Or maybe people within our own circles of influence and our family and friends that for whatever reason have become cold or bitter or unforgiving. And then you end up with all those tensions I often talk about where you can't control it. It's one of the 5 truths, right? You're not in control. So then how do we love? And this becomes the defining reality. G.K. Chesterton once said, love means loving the unlovable, or it is not a virtue at all. Love means loving the unlovable, or it is not a virtue at all. There's a challenge for us in all that. And that's difficult. It's exhausting. I've had a particularly frustrating week with that kind of experience of having done things for people that were not reciprocated, were not appreciated. And, you reach a point, you get to the end of the week, and you go, what? I've done all these great things and there was no appreciation. And I was talking to someone after Mass at 5 o'clock, but I had said this in that homily. As I say that as a celibate, most people just go, yeah, I call that being a parent. I just do all these wonderful things that aren't appreciated. And it always reminds me of my favorite scene in the movie Groundhog Day when he finally kind of becomes redeemed and he's going around doing all those good deeds. And at one point, he checks his watch and he's running late and he sprints and he catches that kid who falls out of the tree. And if you've never seen the movie, it's well worth it. And of course, the kid just kind of jumps out of his arms and sprints away. And he says, you've never thanked me, not once. He said, see you tomorrow. Maybe. But that's a lot of what life is. I had a French-Canadian professor in Toronto that used to say this about love, right? That sometimes people say, well, what happens if I fall in love with someone that my family doesn't like? Or what happens if whatever? And he always go, love? Love is not a mud puddle that you fall into. Love is a commitment. It is a sacrifice. And that's true. It's both things. It is reciprocal love. But it's also what we heard in the second reading about an expiation. It sometimes steps in the gap for other people, whether they want it or not, or like it or not. There's Jesus on the cross, dying for us, and humanity's mocking him in that moment. How must that have felt to go, I'm doing this for you? And in that moment, we were so afraid as a species. We were so afraid and so blinded by that fear that was people's response. This is the difficult work. Jesus says in Luke's gospel, oh, you love those who love you? Big deal. Even sinners do that. Oh, you do good to those who do good to you? Thieves and robbers do the same. Great company you're keeping. Right? And he goes on to say, no, you got to love your enemy. You got to love your enemy. And we know that church often reflects culture. We hope it's the other way around, that we can impact culture as a church, but often, it's a two-way street, isn't it? And we see it in our culture. Just a lot of name-calling and creating camps and separating, and that's just not going to take us where we need to go. It's difficult work, and we can't be doing it every moment of the day because it's exhausting. But if we're not committed to stepping into that darker space from time to time, we're kidding ourselves that we're actually living the gospel. We're just kidding ourselves. Right? That God didn't come to earth for anything less than for us to bring the kingdom of God to earth. As he says, that they would be one, Father, as you and I are one. Not that they would be 2,000 different religious denominations, Father, as you and I are. Wait, no, it doesn't work. So the fracturedness is a scandal. And so we want to be working toward that. But like I said, I want to be honest and clear. It's easy to romantically talk about that in this moment when none of us are being asked to do anything about it. But to say, how will we engage it tomorrow or later today? Well, that's where we need to be in prayer and in dialogue and in community and in the Eucharist. To be strengthened by the one who didn't just tell us to do that, he lived that. And that's why when he gives the great command, right, love one another, he could have just said, period. But he had, comma, as I have loved you. And therein lies the challenge for us. And so let us be on the look. Last week we talked about pruning. And, like I said, it didn't matter if you're doing it right or doing it wrong. You're getting cut, if you caught that in last week's gospel, right? If you're not bearing fruit, you get cut off. But if you are bearing fruit, you get pruned. And I think that's one of the things love does to us. It prunes us to deeper fruit. But part of that is a cut. And it looks different. And so we just take that moment to think about what it is that God's asking of us. What are the difficult relationships? What are the pains and the fractures that we'll be asked to, at least a little bit, testify to love, not testify to division, to disintegration, literally to pull it apart. It isn't what we're called to. Believe me, I get it. This is the difficult work of following Jesus Christ. I wish there was some simpler way, but it would appear to be. If he would have wanted it that way, he would have set it up that way from the beginning. But I don't know about you. I know there have been times in my life when I was the problem in the relationship. I was the one being difficult, being selfish, and not giving even an inch, much less meeting someone halfway. And what brought me to halfway was someone continuing to love me, even in my selfishness and my ugliness. Eventually, love wins. Love conquers sin and death in the passion of Jesus Christ, and it will conquer our fear and our selfishness. It may take time, it may take a lifetime, but it does indeed win. And so we want to be the kind of people that testify to that. Otherwise, there'll be more of my friend that I mentioned at the beginning. Those people going, they say they love everyone, but they don't, right? And they'll call us on our crap. They'll call us on it, and they'll have every right to go, see, you're no different than the rest of us. You're as afraid of things that I'm afraid of, and you're not living in a way that says you believe in resurrection or that you believe in the love of God. Anything less is cheap, and it doesn't look very different. And so as we look around our world and see so much that's in need of the love of God, the mercy of God, the peace of God, how will we be asked to testify to that? As I said, we can't do that all the time, always. It's exhausting. It is. But what are the little ways in which we'll begin to engage it? Maybe open a dialogue or step a little bit in this direction towards someone that at least begins to make that little cut so that more fruit can be born, to make the opportunity for reconciliation in all of our lives, in all of our relationships. You and I can't change the world's problems, but we can bloom where we're planted. We can be the presence of Christ for those who desperately need it, right where we are. Anything less is just a waste of our time. To pretend that we could do more, well, that's not who we are. So let us take a moment just in our hearts to pause and think about what it is where we need to love better, where we need to love others better, to let ourselves be loved, and prepare ourselves for this Eucharist to strengthen us, to nourish us, to be better lovers of the world. May God be praised.